name's Lisa Dearnley-Davidson. I've been working for Oracle now since 2001. I've been working in the big data space for Oracle for the last 3 years of that time, always within sort of the business analytics area. I started my career back in the 90s. I'm not going to go how far back, but it's always been within sort of the data warehousing, big data analysis kind of areas. And I've worked with video and audio, as well as other forms of media within databases, right up until pretty much today, if you will. So the talk today is going to be about big data. Let me just go back to that safe harbor statement. This is just to cover Oracle in case I say anything that is about any of the brand new releases that got mentioned at Open World around release dates or anything like that. So I just have to make you aware that some of the things that I might mention tonight may actually be very, very recent announcements to do with the big data and what Oracle is doing. So hopefully tonight we're going to take you on a bit of a journey. We're going to talk about, what is big data? What do we mean when we say big data? What does it encompass when we talk about big data? And then we're going to talk about how certain organizations are using big data, what they're doing with it, how they perceive it within their organizations. We'll talk about sort of that road trip about how we go from, well, this is what it is, this is what it looks like, now what can I do with it? And how can I utilize it? Before we then move into a couple of case studies that we've got that talk about exactly how people are using it today and they're making money from it. And then finally, sort of how do we now act on it? Okay, so what is the big deal about big data? It's a big buzzword that we've all probably heard about in the news, Radio 4, BBC, the government has issued statements into the press about it. You've had Edward Snowden talking about it. It really is today's buzzword. But what do we actually mean by it? Well, in any one given minute of the day, there is a tremendous amount of information being produced. I'm not expecting you to necessarily read all that from the very, very back, but just to give you an idea, in 1 minute, there are 30 hours of footage uploaded to YouTube. So effectively, you can't catch up with everything that's uploaded. In 1 minute, we have, let's see, 100,000 new tweets go through. Who in the room uses Twitter? So a few, yeah. Who in the room uses Twitter on a phone? Yeah, same kind of hands. Did you know that there are 150 plus metadata items captured when you tweet on your phone? And those items get correlated and then utilized for things like marketing and sold on for other means. How many of you download apps on your phone? That's pretty much everybody. How many of you actually read the small print when you download those apps? There's a lot less hands in the room now. Because a lot of that data that they're collecting, they're doing so because you said yes. And then they're utilizing it. And a lot of that information is what we do consider to be big data. So Gartner decided to quantify what is big data in sort of all the paperwork. So we talk about the 3 V's. Actually, it kind of grew from 3. But really, we start with the 3. It can be volume. So it can be large amounts of data. It doesn't have to be. It just can be. So we're talking terabytes, petabytes, zettabytes of data. Think about YouTube and Facebook and all those tweets that are going through. That's not a small amount of information that's being collected. We then talk about velocity. So the speed of the data, how fast it's being produced. Again, 100,000 tweets in a minute. But also think about every time you make a phone call on your mobile phone, as you drive with your hands-free kits, as you walk from place to place, there's a multitude of packets being generated from one single phone. Now, if there's however many 100,000 of phones in the country all doing that at once, then you've got an awful lot of traffic coming through at high velocity. We then talk about the variety of the data. So a lot of people think big data means unstructured data, or it just means Facebook data. It actually means all kinds of data. It's the stuff that you've got in your RDBMS right now, the kind of things that are being captured by your back office. It's the documents that you're storing on your file systems, as well as the tweets, the Facebook items, the Instagram, the Flickr. So it's all data. The additional V's are things like veracity, all of the unknown, all of the different styles of data. And then finally, we have value. Okay, out of this mountain of data, we want to try and achieve something. There's got to be something in it somewhere, else why did we store it in the first place? And other V's have come up and don't necessarily get as much airtime as others. So there's like, it's in vogue. It's another one that comes out now and then. So these things exist. But the main three, as defined by Gartner, are those three. So Oracle did a study into just how much data is produced versus actually how much is used. And the scary one is that only 12% of executives felt like they were really getting the best out of their data, out of their analysis that they were doing. Only 12%. That's 88%, if I've got my maths right, that aren't really utilising what they've got at their fingertips. So the amount of data we produce within an organisation versus actually how much of it we use, there's a huge, huge gap. So, for example, how many of you logged into an intranet today? Yeah, I mean, pretty much every organisation has one now. Or at least if they don't have an internal web presence, they certainly have an external web presence. And all of that is producing information. You have your log files, so as people click through the pages, all of that is producing knowledge about behaviours that people are achieving. So as you work through, you can discern information such as when did they join the pages, when did they leave the pages, what were they looking for, did they appear to find it, were there broken links. All of this information can be gathered and utilised, but very few people beyond ISPs actually do make use of it to then tailor towards a customer's need. So we look at data in two ways now. We have the data that we're utilising to run the business. This is the analytics that we've grown to just use because it's there. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, data warehouses were in this spot right now. They were brand new. Nobody really knew what they meant. Nobody really knew if they had to have one, but they all thought it was really important. Nowadays, a data warehouse is pretty much guaranteed. Somewhere in the organisation, there will be one. But how widely it's utilised, exactly what it encompasses, will change organisation by organisation. But in essence, things like your key performance indicators, your KPIs, that are used to really run the business, things like margin, things like profit and loss, are all generated to run that business. Big data is about taking additional data to then change the business. There is a company within the UK, it is a TV programming producing company, which basically narrows down the list somewhat, who have gone about their entire direction very, very differently. They started out making TV programs, selling advertising on their channel. They then took a step back and they thought, well, what could we do differently? So they moved out into the web. They introduced streaming. They now do stuff specifically for online, podcasts and webcasts specifically for online. They're no longer a TV producing company. They're now a digital company. So they have changed the entire nature of the way they do business by utilising what people wanted, understanding that, and then putting it to work for them. So this is how we see analytics moving forward. We started off on this left-hand side, the traditional analytics, sort of within the last 10 years, where we would produce a report, truly produce just a report. It may be in Excel, it may be somebody just running some SQL on a database to find some numbers to hand to somebody, but we started utilising some of the data. We then moved into a lot of the sort of the big data aspects, where we started producing more complex data warehouses. We asked more complex queries, but it was always very, very structured in their approach. And as we move finally over to the right, where we're going to now, where things become much more rapid, the insights that we're demanding have to be now, not in a week, not in a month. They want to be now. And those insights are being generated by people that we talk about called data scientists. And those data scientists have effectively grown out of the data analysts of 2.0. They started out working with the tools, and now they've just encompassed even more. So, for example, those people that typically worked with the databases with tools such as SPSS, Oracle Data Mining, SAS, There's only a number of tools out there that do data science. We're now seeing an inclusion of things like R. So universities are actually teaching some of the newer techniques that we don't necessarily utilize in business right now. So people are going out and hiring data scientists based on what they've been trained in. Mathematicians would have very, very often fallen into this field. If you look at marketing companies, they will normally have a huge group of data scientists working internally to understand their business, to be able to market in just the right way to just the right audience. And they will be looking at the various people. But actually using true sort of data science to achieve an end goal is probably something that many companies do without actually realizing it. Because big data is not just about using unstructured data, it's about using all data. It's about getting in there and actually mining for information. So, as an example, is there anybody here at all, given this is a UK audience, that follows baseball? Yeah, I didn't think so. Is there anybody here that actually watched the film Moneyball, though? I've got a few nods. Yeah, a few. So Moneyball is a film with Brad Pitt, funnily enough, all about the Oakland Athletic baseball team in 2002. They went out and used stats, nothing but numbers, to produce the more optimum team. Not the best team. They didn't go out and spend billions of dollars trying to get that big hitter that such and such a group has, so the San Francisco Giants, the New York Jets, or whoever. Jets in American football. New York Yankees even. They didn't try and just build a big numbered team. They went out and they filled very specific positions based on statistics of that player. And they filled each of the gaps in that fashion. So instead of buying a player for $1 million, they bought one for $250,000. And then they would trade to get just the right fit for that hole. They then went on to win 20 back-to-back games, which has never been seen before and never been seen since, based on stats. Nothing else. How many sports out there are based on stats? Pretty much all of them. You know, how the players have helped other players, how many goals they've scored, how many winning hits they've had in tennis, you name it, it's all about the stats. Imagine if you could apply that to business as well. And therefore, the statistics side suddenly becomes very important. So there is, if you look on Wikipedia, on Moneyball, it'll actually give you the stats book that it's based off as well. So for anybody that's interested, you can go and have a look it up and then follow the links towards the actual statistics processes that they used. Okay, so what is it actually worth though? I mean, we talk about data, we've talked about a mountain of data, we all have data, we're all producing it. Whether we're in a database company like Oracle, or whether we're in a marketing agency or a retailer, we're all producing some kind of information. So what is it actually worth? Well, we've had customers that have seen a 44% rise in their customer satisfaction in the customer experience. So this is where they're using things such as clickstream to understand how their customers are interacting with systems. They're listening to what the customer says and then disseminating the information from the call centers. And they're utilizing that to really reach out and personalize for their customer. With operational improvement, we can now use sort of big data and the whole statistical approach to understand where processes aren't quite achieving what they could achieve. Even things as simple as back office. Why is my accounting not flowing as well as it should be? Why have I got AP holds happening? Why have my contracts not been fulfilled? All of these things could actually be checked out because now you're utilizing much more information that might not have seemed relevant before that you can now start to bring together and start looking into it to see where are the gaps. And another one is new business models. I already told you about the TV company. How do I go to market? How can I change my business? What else can I actually put out there? I've worked with a government agency who used to do one area of business, but now they effectively sell data. That is their new business model. I can't tell you what data because that would give it away, but they have literally changed their business model from taking phone calls and getting paperwork through They now basically sell data. They have changed their business model. And therefore, they've taken themselves into the 21st century to keep themselves alive. So we've got 3 examples there. I'm not quite sure if it's readable from the back. But effectively, a US city school district, 8 million in revenue. A global computer manufacturer, 19% on their close rate. We then have a large financial service company, 1,000% year ROI. These are real customers of Oracle's. So this is what's been achieved with big data. This is what's possible. If we look at IDC, they reckon the growth rate of 30% in 2014. We're actually estimating much, much higher by 2020. And each year you look at these numbers, they've doubled. So they might say 30% in 2014 could be 50% by 2050. The thing with big data is we've amassed 90% of our data in just the last 2 years alone. 90% that we're not utilizing. All of this information that we could utilize, we could turn into something that we're not doing. And then finally, 93% of executives believe they're losing money by not doing so. So the desire to actually achieve something is there. They actually do want to embrace it. But of course, then comes the question of the how. So in essence, when you move forward, some of the things that you will see with analytics in particular is how much people are gaining by actually putting money into it. And we've noticed a trend where in big data, people are starting small because everybody's a little unsure. Do I invest big? Do I go big? Well, actually, probably not. Start small. Because the investment that you gain from the small start will then lead to reinvestment. Because the numbers basically say it. Again, from real customers. For every dollar spent, $10 return. And we think that's actually on the small side. But that's what we're willing to put behind it. So some customers are adopting it, some haven't got there yet, and then there's the ones that have already been doing it. And that's the thing, is because big data is not as new as it might first appear. The phrase big data is, but I already mentioned, I've worked with video and audio. I worked with video and audio in the 90s, doing cataloging facial recognition. People see that as very new. It's actually been around for a very long time. Being able to search Word documents, Acrobat, search Excel, has been around for a very long time. And these organizations have been doing exactly that for a very long time. They've been using statistics to help them with fraud in real time. They've been using big data to be able to monitor crime in real time. And then we have, all of the oil and gas guys out there that have been trying desperately to streamline everything. They've been using things like 3D techniques for the geographic formations because they're looking to see where the next big strike will be. So they're utilizing all the data they're collecting through all of the drilling that they're doing to effectively reinvest the knowledge to find the next location. And they have been doing that pretty much all the time. It's just that computers are catching up with what they've been doing. If I work with one of the aircraft producing industries in the country, 20 years ago, it would take them maybe a week, maybe longer, to do 10 cases of aerodynamics on an aircraft. Now they can do 100 in an hour because the IT is catching up to meet it. And that's just on basic structured data. Now we're starting to apply other things to that. So where it is new, where we're starting to see customers pick it up, are in a multitude of areas. So, as examples, retailers are starting to not just look at basket analysis, they're starting to look at what we put in our basket before we hit buy and then took it back out. Well, actually, maybe I'm not so sure. Maybe I've seen a better deal somewhere else. Maybe just not today. We've seen customers that are looking at things like the insurance and the claims processing to try and smooth down that back office process to get those information out faster. The one thing that we're seeing very much in common across all of these is fraud. pretty much every organisation, whether they know it or not, have fraud in some shape or form. You know, and it's things like, you know, banking fraud. We're using the capabilities of real time to spot transactions coming through that look fraudulent. How many here have had a phone call from their bank to say, we've blocked a transaction, or had their card blocked? Yeah, me too. Me too. And it is because they're running those kind of algorithms to look for fraud. The big data aspect of it is to utilise more data, more information from different sources to make it more knowledgeable. So hopefully next time you happen to be online shopping at midnight, they don't just stop your card, but they actually use more information about yourself to say, actually, I noticed there's a lot of online shopping at midnight. So we'll just ignore that transaction and see what else happens. But that will be my personal model as opposed to the generalistic model. So that's how we're seeing it change. So how do I get there? That's where I want to be. Where I am right now is I've still got my analysis going on. I might be doing some data science, but it's very much in a structured approach. Maybe it takes a little while. Maybe my IT department has said it's 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line. My business is demanding from me that I want it now, but I look at what other IT projects I've got to do. So it works from both sides. But in essence, a lot of what big data is about is asking questions, first and foremost. We've started in the top left corner. So where we are roughly today in most organisations is we're answering the questions we know. What is my P&L? What is my margin? Going back to that analytics aspect, going back to that data warehouse aspect. What we're starting to see is the business in particular looking at it going, what else can I ask of this data? You know, what else is out there? And from that, they then start to say, well, what do I need to be able to answer that question? Where should I be looking? So we start to do data discovery in that aspect. Whatever tool it is, they're starting to explore the data. And this is the business doing this. This isn't necessarily IT saying, we think you should have. This is the business going, I think I need. And then moving that forward, they start to hopefully start to see new levels of inquiry coming through, new examples of information coming through that help their business. And it's not going to be the panacea. It's not going to be everything's going to work right out of the box. There are going to be rabbit holes. If you ask any data scientist, for every one golden nugget they find, there was probably 9 rabbit holes they ran down and came to a blank wall. I've had one customer say to me, what I want to be able to achieve is I want to fail first, try again, then fail faster. So I can speed this process up. I don't want to be waiting 6 months, a year. I need to know it now. My customers are leaving in droves. I need to know why now. I had a bank in Spain that wasn't the best performing bank in Spain. In fact, you can look them up. They're all over the media, called CaixaBank. And they implemented, first and foremost, an area that looked at how their customers were interacting with their web piece. They started small. They realized the benefit when they started to rise up through the ranks. When they started reacting better to the customers, when it got more personal. How many of you would prefer to actually interact with a person but don't necessarily have the time in a bank? You'd rather have the personal service you can get with a bank manager. Most people are turning to the web, though, because we all lead busy lives. What if they could be advising us like the bank manager could? For me personally, around the things I've been looking at, rather than my generic 25 to 35 or 35 to 45 or whatever group they think you fall into. It would be so much better if it was tailored. And that's what we're looking to achieve. Hence, we go around the loop again. We've now found something, we feed that in, we start to measure the business on it. We go looking for something else. It doesn't stop. We go looking for new insights based on other bits of information that we've added. Or we refine, actually, the questions that we've got. We've got a telecoms customer that's looking at churn models and just making those churn models better so they can understand their customers better. Because at the end of the day, it's always nicer when they understand you. They're more like a retailer or any kind of interface that you're working with, any kind of commercial interface, it's always better when they understand you better, rather than just giving you the generic, why not have a loan? Why not have this phone? Why not have this item off Amazon? It helps if they are actually personalising it to you, as is shown by that bank. So this is actually two sides of the same coin. We have both business and IT all wanting the same thing, but they might be talking a slightly different language. And what we're seeing is this disruption in IT in general, because big data isn't the only new word on the block. We have cloud, we have digital, we have mobile, we have all of these other phrases and how they come together. And what we see is, from the technology perspective, all these leaps happening with things like big data, all this brand new terminology coming out. I mean, how many people have looked and gone, you know, the lists and seen Hadoop, Pig, Hive, Zookeeper, Solar, starting to run out, Flume, yeah, the Storm, Spark, and the list is actually pretty endless of things. And we don't necessarily need all of it, but there's a lot of new technology there to be harnessed. On the flip side, the business want performance. They want it now. They want to be able to do it themselves. They don't want to have to rely on somebody spending weeks or months doing something for them. So we see things like self-service, more predictive analytics. We see in-memory becoming quite a big deal. Because again, it's about empowering the users to go out and find those golden nuggets in that data mountain to then achieve the next level of business and move it forward. So who's adopting it and what are they doing with it? That's always a good question. I've talked a lot about retailers and telcos and such. What about the functional side? The functional side kind of applies to most businesses. And these are just some of the functional things that we've seen. So customer intimacy, customer experience, I've probably talked enough about that one. Even things like supply chain, looking at logistics. Majority of organisations in the commercial, retail, CPG arena have some kind of logistics. Oil and gas has logistics. Postal logistics. There's a lot out there that all rely on getting things to places on time. And therefore, you know, that's quite a big thing to actually try and reduce the supply chain, understand why things are going on. Wouldn't it be great if you ran a bus fleet, if you could bring that bus in to fix it before it knew it was broken? With predictive analytics, that is a very big possibility. So rather than just saying, right, 6 months are up, I need to go for a service, it's like, there's a path here where every 3 or 4 months something happens after something else has happened. Well, why don't I track that something else instead? Why do I wait for a flag to go up and my bus to break down and 40 people to be stranded? That's the possibilities. If I look at things like pricing, being able to react faster to pricing capabilities, and how many see high street wars going on between people dropping the prices. We see it often enough at the petrol stations. You know, go down the road and one's a penny cheaper, then drive back an hour later and the other one's gone down. So you see those kind of things. So being able to react, but using it in a much more predictive fashion. Do you really want to be trying to change your numbers every single day, or do you want to predict that in 2 months' time you need to drop a price because of something else that's happened? For example, this year the hazelnut crop failed in one of the big areas that actually feeds Nutella. What's the betting Nutella's going to go up in price? That one's a bit of an obvious one. But what if we could use stuff that was less obvious to actually achieve that? When Delia Smith started talking about white eggs, then everybody sold out rapidly. There's another prediction capability, being able to do things like that. If we know, for example, there is going to be a heat wave coming, should I be stocking up all my fridges in my store with sausages and burgers? Or should I be getting in tins of soup, because we know the weathermen usually are a bit iffy at this time of year? So it's understanding those kinds of predictions that can help your business chain. P&L, we've already mentioned, but we can look at all sorts of areas throughout the organisation, from HR through to finance. All of the different processes have multiple linkage points. But it's very hard to tell where in that chain something might be going wrong. It's all structured data. We're not talking about bringing in Facebook into this. We're not talking about bringing Instagram into this. We're talking about looking at the data we have under our control and actually just utilizing that to make our business better. Prescription fraud, big business. This was actually in the newspapers, very big business. There's 3 zeros on the end of that for millions per day. Now what actually happened was the information was taken, it was disseminated, and patterns were found, hotspots were found, tools were used to actually achieve that. And when they looked into it, they actually married it up with social media. They actually went out to Facebook, they went out and scraped the web, looked at newspaper reports from the BBC website, from Reuters and such, and they actually found, because this was based on historic data, that a person had been done in Bolton for prescription fraud. And sure enough, there was the blip in the data. But unless you take a good quantity of data, it's very hard to see the pattern. In that particular instance, the guy was online going, hey, guess what? If you tick this box, you can get away with it for free. Easy loophole to close. So that's a case of actually using unstructured data with structured data to bring the two together to find the process issue. Financial services, managing complaints. There's actually a number around this. The one I know better is a car place, looking at complaints and understanding that looking through general complaint information about, say, a warranty claim or such, and going in and saying, okay, I've got a problem with my headlights. Oh, I've got a problem with my steering. I've got a problem with my windscreen wipers or my indicators. And then trying to find a common theme throughout. And this is where being able to look at unstructured data really helps. Because whole bunches of text, it's not easy for a basic machine to pull out a bit of information without some intelligence behind it. And certainly if you're trying to trawl through millions of records, a human eye is not going to do it. But all of these different complaints led to a problem with a battery. Do a recall on the battery, complaints go down. In this kind of interest, it was about speeding up the whole process. I mean, a lot of complaints, a lot of people get frustrated when complaints aren't actually listened to. If you can shorten that time to respond, a lot of complaints actually will go away. Because now that people feel like they've been heard and things have been taken in hand and listened to. So again, it's about addressing things in the most efficient manner, but utilising the information at hand, which could come from any source. I mean, imagine, in most cases, Facebook, there is any number of organisations that have got a bad rep on Facebook with people that have been complaining about them, about poor service or whatever. Bring that feed in so you can understand your customer better. If they're complaining out there, if you know about it, you can do something about it. And there is so many websites out there that we could actually be tracking. The favourite of the moment is Mumsnet. That's got quite a big sway behind it. A few nods in the audience. And yes, Facebook's there, but then we've got things coming up to the forefront like WhatsApp, Snapchat, Instagram's getting used a lot. But even basic blogs, there are a number of blogs out there where the person is very independent of the organisation, and they will be writing things that people listen to. And they will basically have clout with their audience. They will sway their audience. If you can find those bits of information and feed that in to your piece, then you become that much more powerful because you understand your audience better. If you could work with that champion, you've got basically a built-in audience. You've got a whole set of evangelists that will go out and talk about your product or your business or whoever. And this works very well in services-based organisations, for example, that word of mouth. These services are quite hard to actually just advertise. If you take, small businesses do this with Facebook. Photographers do this. Picking up on the fact we've got 2 cameras here. The organisations like that will utilise the social media to the best of their ability. And what you will find is, so for example, if you take, and this is based on personal experience, you've got Canon, huge organisation selling lots of cameras. they get evangelists in of photographers that use their kit. But they actually give free kit out to people, effectively, that have quite a big following to test it for them. Gives them better PR. And it works out a lot cheaper than going on TV with a huge advert campaign. And these days, because so many people are literally on the phone, doing Facebook, doing whatever, you have a bigger audience based on the phone with things like YouTube and Facebook than you potentially have on a TV channel. Especially now you can even stream a lot of those channels to your phone. And then we've got another one, a retailer, turning searches into sales. It is effectively that. How can I pinpoint what that customer is looking for so that I can better service their needs? So when a customer looks for a particular type of, in this particular instance it was computer setup, so when they're ticking a whole bunch of boxes about size and capacity and such, maybe actually what they're after is not a laptop, it's a desktop. Maybe it's not a desktop, maybe it's a server. So actually what we should be showing them is something different. I know you searched on this, but perhaps you would like this, based on what you've been saying. So it's about turning around that information that is coming through, but having learnt from so many other pieces of information. So one of the things that we talk about with big data in general is very often the volume does matter, because now we're looking at getting 80% right, not necessarily 98% right, which we would in analytics in general, because we have a much smaller data set. But with big data, we tend to talk about billions of records, and therefore we have a much wider spread, and we can allow for dirty data, we can allow for records that don't quite match, we can allow for a lot more because we have that much more to work from. And it is big value. We start to invest in this, we start to see it actually turn into something. And it's not entirely new. And we talk about big data as being this new stuff over here, it's structured, it's unstructured, it's Facebook, it's this, it's this. It's not, it's about all the data, making use of everything that is available to you. So that does mean your back office, that does mean your front office if you're customer facing. It does mean what they're saying about you on Facebook or on YouTube or whichever. But it's about bringing all that data together. All the data that we do gather doesn't get exploited. There is so much information that we could be utilising ourselves, that we could put to work for us, that we don't. It's just waiting. One of the things I ask typically is, how many people, well, we already asked the question on the intranet, how many people have shared file systems? How many people have multitude of databases that they know exist in an organisation? Because you can bet bottom dollar, there's probably another 50% you didn't know exist. Because data tends to hang around. How many companies actually archive off? Or how many of us have access to stuff that we wrote 10, 15 years ago on that shared drive, depending on how long you've with the organisation? So all of this data is mounting up. So it's about making use of that, actually exploiting what you have. Exploiting that data will give you insights that you maybe didn't have before, especially when you start bringing it together, especially when you start applying different types of data. What happens if I put my financial data next to my HR data? What happens? Let me just add a bit of Facebook in there. One of the stories that when we first started talking about big data we mentioned a lot is things like using data for medical reasons. What if I took all the health records in the UK, which is coming up, anonymised, but we then looked at how things were trending around the UK. It has been discussed in the newspapers that maybe specialist health centres could be opened, knowing that a trend is coming. What if I know that heart problems are specific in one area? What if I know if there's an arthritis issue somewhere else? And I can start tailoring the healthcare around the country. How much better service can I provide? But the big key one to it is if you don't action it, you'll get no value. You've got to do something about it. If those baseball players had gone, this is all very well and good, but actually I really like this guy and I've got a good gut feeling about him, let's just go by him instead, they would never have won 20 games back to back. So if you do invest in that mountain of data and you do start to exploit it and pull it together and start to see insights, unless you actually act on it, then the investment is lost. That's it. So, I've seen lots of nods. Do you have any questions?
Huge risk for success. There's no guarantees in this sort of thing.
There isn't. As I said, a lot of these lead to rabbit holes. So the question is that, I go back to the point where I made, you could start small. So for example, if you look at some of these external feeds, then things like Facebook and Twitter will very often have an API that will allow you to get a very small amount of data from them. You can invest in tools, or a lot of the tool sets themselves are open source. So in essence, to try them is free, and start actually looking at doing the equivalent of web crawling, because there's a lot of information out there that is effectively out for the wider consumption. You've already invested in all of that data in-house. So the question is next is really, can you afford to invest some people's time to actually look at that data? The question back would be, can you afford not to 5 years from now? So yeah, it is a risk, but then so was building data warehouses 15 years ago. So was databases in general 40 years ago. So it is going to be a curve, as with all tool sets, and there is going to be an aspect of pain as we see people fight for the dominance in the marketplace, especially around the open source, because there are so many different tools. And we will see some of them drop beside the wayside, and hopefully it's not the tool we've invested in. But it happens. I mean, take the video formats and Betamax, VHS, one of them lost. And some argue that not the best one won out of it. So the questions then move forward. But in essence, if you start small, if you can start to see where there is gain, then you can use the small investment to enlarge it and add a bit more. Again, I mean, big data isn't about saying, let's go and ransack the whole of the web at once, or the whole of the internal data at once. I think there might be something in this little corner. And the reason why I showed so many where businesses are using it is to show the use case aspect of it. I had an IT group come to us and say, we know there's something in this data, but we can't convince the business because the business didn't have a use case. Find a use case, then hopefully you can find the data that will help either prove or disprove the use case. And in certain instances, disproving it is just as useful as actually proving it. As I said, typically there is fraud everywhere. Sometimes you've just got to find it. But then you've got to start with the right data sets to actually not give up before you start, almost. So but there will be some investment to actually get going, even if it's just somebody's time. But there's a lot out there to read. There's a lot of use cases. If you just search, so for whichever business you are, if you want to do something like, I don't know, big data, use case, finance, there will be a whole multitude of news articles and various other magazine articles that will give you 5 or 6 different use cases straight off the bat. Then same for insurance, same for retail. And there is pretty much a whole set of use cases out there in the ether that can be ransacked and utilized. I mean, from my experiences and what I perceive big data to be, I'd say pretty much everyone I've come across have been utilizing it to a greater or lesser degree. It's just how much investment they've put in it. And as I mentioned, oil and gas have been doing it for years because they live off the stats. Retailers are a relative newcomer to that whole process because they're starting to move into the internet world. They're starting to suggest things. So if you've got a Tesco card and you get the vouchers through, you'll find that recently they seem to have improved and actually are more targeted, which to me says they've been utilising their information better than maybe 5 years ago or longer, depending on how long it's been around for. But in essence, I can't think of a particular industry that I haven't seen use it. So airlines are using it. Airlines are using it around things like weather systems. They're using it to help predict the passenger capacities, delays and such. Retailers are using it around basket analysis. The first clickstream I worked on was in the 90s. So for ISPs and for online retailers, that was all the case. What we're seeing is a refinement. So back then it would be very much somebody else put this in the basket like you did, ergo you must want this. Now it's much more, I've seen you've been buying these things, maybe you'd also like this too. So that everything's being refined rather than being brand new. There are security elements to big data, certainly, like there is with any data. And yes, I mean, it's been very visual, probably for 2 years now in the media, about things like Facebook, probably longer with Facebook, actually.
Especially with the potential of the Internet of Things coming out.
Yes, and more information is being gathered. That's why I asked the question, who actually reads the small print? Because I know, I have to admit that I don't. And it does, and I do then think afterwards, hang on, who have I just given a whole bunch of information to? Because I'm walking around with a GPS system in my pocket. I could be tracked, theoretically. We have to put a lot of, effectively, faith in the laws of the country about what they can and can't do. And there is a lot on things like security. So, for example, if your privacy rules are set on Facebook, they can't sell that data. If your privacy rules aren't set, it's a free-for-all because people can gain access to it. The blogs that people are putting out on the internet can be scraped. And there can be a lot of personal information in those blogs. There are instances whereby the criminals are less governed by the rules than we are. For example, they don't care about privacy rules, they don't care about data retention or anything like that. They'll just utilize it by any means necessary. Take sort of the general phishing and such that happens by phone to gather passwords and so on, let alone getting into the hacking. But from a privacy aspect, it's actually doubly hard because a lot of different countries will have a lot of different rules as well. And what might be a law in the UK might be very different, say, in Asia-Pac or in America or somewhere else. And therefore, we've got to be very cognizant of where you're sourcing the data from. So if you want to stay within the bounds of the rules, then it's that. But a lot of it at the moment is very much it's on the internet, it must be free. And that's one of the big problems of big data, in essence. And it is up to us as users and creators to police it ourselves to a certain degree. But there are security aspects to it as well. There's the Sentry project alone that is trying to bring rules together about how to enforce security of the data so that, yes, I'm collecting all this together, but really should I let my entire organisation have access to it? In the same way I don't let everybody have access to my other data. I certainly don't let everybody log in and see my P&L statements, only what gets published out. Therefore, shouldn't big data be under the same governance as that? But again, it is very, very difficult to police from that perspective.
Related to her question, what's the best strategy for grabbing data from different systems? Is it best to take data from different systems, put into a single database?
That's a very good question. I guess it depends on what you want to do with your data strategy. Your security strategy will have a big part to play in that. So things like redaction and security policies and such coming out of an internal database to be put into a pool. We don't tend to talk about a single database. We tend to talk about a reservoir or a pool or a lake. They're the key terms you'll hear if you do any searches or read. Because in essence, it's about bringing the data together so that tools can access it. But from the possibility of securing it or anonymizing it, in essence, the sheer quantity of it couldn't be its own anonymizer, if you will. Because if you're going out to, say, Facebook, and you're grabbing 10 billion records, you're not actually interested in that Joe Smith wrote this about his toast at 3 o'clock this morning. You're interested in how many people mentioned toast today. So in essence, the sheer quantity can do a lot of that for you. However, when you're looking internally, I would suggest that before you put it into the data pool, if there's any serious data concerns or data security concerns, either you are going to secure the whole pool or you're going to enact some kind of redaction before it goes in or anonymization before it goes in. Because in essence, very often the truly personal data is not quite the data that we're interested in. So you're not necessarily interested in people's names. You're not really interested in what their bank details are. You might be interested in who they bank with and that they follow a certain set pattern. But it is not so much about the name, at least unless you're in something like the security services. Edward Snowden has been a big feature of the newspapers for going on 2 years now. And a lot of what he's talking about is considered to be big data. So from that aspect alone, is thinking about all of those different security pieces. But I would suggest that when looking at big data, you also look at your company's security policies around how you disseminate that information around the company, especially when you're sourcing data from an internal system to start with. Some of it's about the use case as well. If you're wanting to apply a use case, you've got to think about what do I need. If I'm looking for a marketing, utilizing marketing to target a certain type of person better, then what kind of attributes am I looking for? A name doesn't necessarily fall into that. So I can anonymize that, I don't really care. But it's also who you give access to that data pool. What we tend to see is people with direct access are very few. You're not going to have 10,000 people within your organization accessing the whole of the big data set. They're going to be accessing probably, I would suggest, the analytics side. The data analysts tend to be in tens, potentially hundreds, very rarely in thousands, unless that's what their business is about. So there are organizations out there that are all about the data. Dunnhumby's one that works for Tesco's, works with Tesco's, given the Tesco's only. They're all about the stats. So they will be utilizing vast quantities of data, and they have vast quantities of data analysts and data scientists. But on average, an organization might have 5 to 10 accessing that data. So then potentially it's also the security about that person, because it then becomes very similar to HR data or financial data. So it's, do they have the right rights to access it, rather than anonymizing it on the way in? But it comes down to your security policy. Got any more?
That's going to annoy them.
You could suggest that it already does when it's done like that, but one could suggest that maybe they're not using it right. If they keep emailing a person and you're just junking it, i.e. if they email you for long enough and you've done nothing about it, surely they should be learning from that, in essence. That if you only ever go to their website and you never go through the email, perhaps that's where actually they should be putting the offers and the banners to say, actually you might like this, and just quit on the email because you've never clicked on it. So I would suggest that they're not actually using big data yet, or as well as they could be, because they should be learning from that experience. Because I know I never click on them either. I know you'll get jumped. Pretty much delete, delete, delete.
And yet we have problems with predictive analytics looking specifically at Google Flu, for example, which worked well for fantastic, but I'm not sure we're quite there yet. Would you agree?
I'd say we're right on the cusp if we're not there, but I think we are, personally, I do. I just don't think people are necessarily applying it as well as they could be. Again, predictive analytics comes up with models, but the models need to be refined as things change. It's not a case of plug it in and leave it and walk away and hope that it keeps churning out the same number week after week, month after month, always picking the right area. We tend to look at more now at machine learning. So actually looking at analysis. And I mean, has anybody here heard of Watson? IBM's Watson? A few hands. their idea is that if they give it enough information and they keep feeding it information and it keeps growing, then it will learn. And therefore, it will get better at what it does, not tail off and disappear. So in essence, it's twofold, really. It's about the data you keep feeding it and then refining it to make it better. And then just going around that loop rather than just say, OK, now that's right, let's move on to the next thing and ignore it. So it's about refinement. I mentioned the churn model. You know, the number, if it's just left static, the number will start to drop because people's behaviours change. So, for example, if you take something like a flu epidemic, I suspect there is differences between how people reacted 10 years ago to now. I mean, a lot more people just carry on working, which is probably going to spread it more than maybe 10, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, or vice versa. And therefore, because people's behaviour changes, so must our models. And I think that's the thing that, because we've only really just started to see how we could utilise these, we haven't quite geared up to keep training them. We haven't necessarily got quite the right skill sets to keep going back and back and back, or maybe we haven't got the right investment to keep going back and back on and train these models and just keep working them, as opposed to install and go, almost. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of sort of almost plug-and-play kind of behaviour in coding, because that's what we can do with Windows and with everything else. But a lot of this is why it's called a science. It comes down to really working it. People make this their livelihood, data science. They're in it coming out of university, and they're in it until they go back to university to get their PhDs or their second PhDs. When they feel like it. And the kinds of people I've been talking to are on their second or third PhD in things like mathematics and statistics and these kind of applied sciences. And because that's what they do. But there's very few of us go out there and hire them in other areas other than, say, marketing or services that actually produce numbers for people. And I think that's where the key learning is that once we've learned something, we need to go back and almost re-ask the question, but in a different way, and keep adding to it and adding to it, and it becomes that loop. Any others? No? Okay, cool.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Lisa, everyone. Let's